Yeah, I would actually argue that striving for absolute perfectionism makes it impossible to connect properly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go into next.
Oh, hey, I did a segue. Hello and welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, the podcast with pixels where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to help train your eyes so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both partnered and solo dancing. Cassie has about 24 years and I have about 26, I believe, is what our years are at now. Tonight, we are kind of framing through a dance, I guess, two-ish kind of. It's just one of the little compilations that Ben Morris posted recently of him and Tatiana Molmann. There's kind of two things that I was really noticing within these dances, especially with Tatiana. We're looking at like how to, stop yourself from feeling like you have to, have perfect dances and perfect technique and perfect movements, all that stuff. And then we're kind of also going to go into how she manages to kind of balance that with also creating some good moments. Or at least that's, in my mind, what I'm talking about. I don't know if you're talking about anything else other than that.
I'm probably going to just riff off of you all night because that's more than enough for an episode. So I'm not going to overcomplicate it. All right. Was that all of your preamble?
Yep.
All right. To the screen share. That was a new noise. And it was not intentional whatsoever. It's just what happened.
How we're feeling today, I guess.
You thought we were tired last time. See, last time we were like tired and not entertaining. We apologize. Tonight we are tired and probably really entertaining. So fasten your seatbelts. Keep your arms inside whatever container you are in currently. I don't see. Told
inside
you,
the frames.
Inside the frame.
Anyway.
Oh no.
I think the main thing that I really noticed when we were watching this dance in particular was just like there's so many moments that Tot just kind of like goes with the flow, but she is still like very intent on creating some good moments like that with her hair right there.
So we get this neck roll, looking at the audience, hand, and then quick with her feet.
And that's such a good, like, she didn't really do anything that changed what Ben was leading her through, but it still was really an eye-catching moment, and it was something that she had total control over. But she's also not like resisting what he's wanting to lead her through. I think one of the things that I always find really frustrating, at least like to an extent watching some dancers, but also like in my own dancing is like you analyze yourself, you watch your own videos and whatever, and you just feel like there's so many things to correct. And like, yes, a lot of times there are things that could be better, but like not everything has to be perfect. And just because you're, not perfect every moment, it doesn't mean that the dance is going to suffer from it.
Yeah, I would actually argue that striving for absolute perfectionism makes it impossible to connect properly.
Yeah, that's what I was going to go into next.
Oh, hey, I did a segue. Can I do a small tangent before said segue?
Yeah, go ahead.
So because we talk a lot about how sometimes we see people attempting to do Lindy in a spotlight because a song kind of has a Lindy vibe. Yep. And everybody's like, oh, wow, they're so good. But they're pulsing upwards instead of down. So this pulsing that they're doing at the beginning right here, this is a really great example of pulsing down. The emphasis is on the downward motion, and then the upward motion is just a release and follow through. So it's just a really beautiful example of pulsing down. And also, I love this silly little with her mouth. She does as if she's like whispering. It's just so cute. Okay, tangent over.
Yeah, so I think what we were talking about before is the whole perfectionism and how that can hinder your technique and ability to connect. So one of the big things with, our dance in particular is that in order to connect with your partner well, you need to be at least, more relaxed than not. And it's just one of those things where when you're striving so much for perfection, like there's not going to be an element of being relaxed, really. And that's just, it's going to prevent that connection. And not even just in that, if you have one thing in mind, like that's, what you're going to do, that's what you're aiming to do, but also just like the actual physical act of relaxing, like the upper body and the core somewhat. You don't need to be fully relaxed. Like you don't need to feel like jelly, but it just like a lot of times it seems like, when you have something in mind and you're trying to do something and make it look really nice, you get a lot of tension in your muscles because, you are wanting to place things in certain spots and, follow through in certain ways. And it really hinders a partnership. Did you have stuff to add to that?
I was just gonna, so we just looked at Tot doing her styling. But the way Ben goes into this section, so we've got a barrel roll and then a turn from him with his leg out. Like he's so relaxed through this whole section. And he's just letting his own natural counterbalance create the shaping. And he's also simultaneously being really attentive to where that handhold needs to be for her to feel really comfortable. So his styling is part being really musical and one part being really connected. And then he's just letting the physics of his body take over. He's not fighting it. Like, could he like point his foot more? I mean, he could, but it also looks great the way it is.
And I think especially in these moments where you're like in motion, like it's not it's not the most obvious thing, right? Like, would you notice it if his foot was really nice and pointed? Yes. But do you notice it because it's not? Not really. Right? Because he comes out of it in such a nice controlled manner to move through to the next thing.
Yeah. It reminds me, actually, if we think about the difference between Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, Gene Kelly was an incredibly precise dancer, and Fred Astaire was a much more relaxed dancer. But we still revere them, regardless of one being more precise versus one being more relaxed. It's a style. So kind of like everything we talk about here on Nerdy and in our Patreon. Hey, I plugged our Patreon. We're just trying to provide tools so you can make conscious choices about your dancing so it can feel the way you want it to feel and look the way you want it to look. And this is one of the considerations. Do you want to be a more relaxed dancer or do you want to be a more precise dancer? And a lot of times we think precise is the only option, but it's not. Because not enough people speak explicitly to the relaxed version being an option.
And to add to that, I think a lot of times, The precision is something that it's okay. You just don't want too much of it.
And then another thing to consider, like especially when you're watching your favorite champions like Ben Morris and Tatiana, is that part of the reason they're so precise is simply the amount of hours that they've put in. Another example, like if we think of Jordan, for example, he's incredibly precise. He's like downright mathematic about it. A lot of that precision, yes, comes from training, but it comes from practicing well, because practice makes permanent.
Yeah.
And that's how it's in his muscle memory. So like practice can make perfect, but it has to be really intentional practice. And if you notice yourself doing something incorrectly, like acknowledge that and then do it correctly immediately afterwards. I know Roro is actually a big proponent of saying out loud, oh, that was wrong, if you notice yourself doing it wrong, and then do it again, attempting to do it correctly. By verbalizing that in between, it just helps wire the correct wires in your brain to help you build into your muscle memory the correct version.
Yeah.
I think that was mostly a complete thought.
I mean, it sounded like it.
Unlike last time where it was so distracting, I was just completely derailed mid-thought. Another thing to notice about these dances in particular between Ben and Tot is they're taking musical moments out of pretty boring, for lack of a better word, patterns. So, for example, this moment right here in the middle of a sugar push, Ben's asking for more extreme compression and accelerated into it. That's basically what he's doing. He's like, get here faster and give me more. and then Tot is choosing to interpret that in a very specific way. Really simple way to accent the music.
And also, she's doing a good job because it's not immediately obvious that that's what he's wanting. And so she's just kind of going into just like a regular step initially. But she then realizes what he's doing and she kind of styles it a little bit along the way. And it's not something that's like perfect, but it's something that is playful. It goes with, what they're doing. And, it's just something, it's fun.
Yeah. And their ears are practically grazing each other. They're so like perfectly offset their heads. It's very satisfying. It's one of those, ooh, that's oddly satisfying.
Such a good angle.
Yep. Oh, you go.
I was just going to talk about this little unwind that we have into kind of Tatiana's like audience addressing moment. It's nice. Like, it's one of those things, like, it's very clearly not exactly what she was planning on doing, but she, adds a little bit of flip of foot, and then she kind of takes it and adds her own little moment to it.
And it's a really clear timing change, which is, I think, what really sells it.
Yeah. And also, so the part before where Ben is kind of unwinding her, leading her through a turn, is not the like cleanest turn in the world, which is fine. But what sticks in the mind is that really nice, precise moment that she has when she faces the audience. Right. So you're not really paying attention to, that wasn't super perfect beforehand, right? What sticks in the mind is this audience address, and she does something that is very precise with the way that she drags the foot in, and it's all very controlled. Then she
that little hair thing.
Into it. Yeah, she moves right into just a little walk. And I think this is something that like Tatiana is really good at, is making you remember moments and not
Mhm.
the rest of the dance necessarily,
Yeah.
because she's somebody that does like to play around with things, right? And when you do that, things don't always go exactly the way that you want them to.
Mhm.
But she's so good at taking something that maybe didn't go exactly how she wanted it to and turning it into like a really good, memorable moment.
Actually, something we were talking about on our Patreon this month. Hey, I did it again. Look at me go. Was how one of the signs of more advanced dancers is how seamlessly they can fix a mistake,
Yeah.
either in their individual dancing or as a partnership.
Mhm.
And so oftentimes we'll see champions only have to do one fix and they're good to go.
Yeah.
We rarely see two or three fixes, one right after the other. Whereas
Mhm.
in the lower levels, you'll see one person fix something, the other person wasn't paying attention, and then they also fix it. And then the
Mhm.
other person's like, oh no, I have to fix it again. And it just chains and escalates. And
Yeah.
so they're literally spending more time in the dance fixing things.
Mhm.
Whereas with the champion dancers and high all-star dancers, they're able to do a really quick subtle fix. And unless you have an eye for it, you're maybe not necessarily even going to see it and realize that there was something to be
Yeah.
fixed.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that was also a whole thought. Let me know. I feel like I just keep getting into these fugue states of soapboxery and
Soapboxery.
forgetting how I got there in the first place. And being
Yeah.
like, I think I wrapped up that thought, but I
Yeah.
don't remember how I started.
Yeah. I mean, welcome to the world of ADHD.
Yeah, yeah.
That is always my brain. uh, so I would add that we're not like calling out Tot or anything for, being an imprecise dance or anything. That's not at
Right.
all the case, because this is something that you see from follow to follow. Tatiana she just happens to be really, really masterful with how she works with the things she experiments with,
Mm-hmm.
and how she makes you not remember as much certain moments in her dancing, because she does take, you know, certain movements, certain looks, and makes you really remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But something that I think I probably mentioned it before that Melissa has said is that you kind of have to be, or learn to be comfortable with being in that awkward in between,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that when you are in that moment, once you kind of start feeling like you're in that moment, things will tend to go worse, rather than if you're in a moment where it's a little awkward, it's not exactly what you wanted, but you just kind of keep moving through it and not overreact. Usually it'll be,
Like this right here at the end, where there's
yeah.
just a lot of hand on face contact. So just
Yeah.
go with it.
Yeah. Can you go back to when she goes to the floor though?
Yeah. Right here. Ho ho, let me go.
Because this, I feel like, is such a good example, like, especially watching it a little bit slower. Like, it's not the cleanest thing because she's clearly just kind of playing around. But she also then just kind of goes with the flow and falls out of it where she feels like she should fall out of it. And then she makes a nice little moment of it and cleans it up, at the very end. And that's not to
Like,
say that this looks sloppy, because it doesn't, but like in terms of, there's some other really well trained dancers in our dance that if you were to slow this down, it would almost look like they were calculating every single inch of where they're putting something, and uh, it doesn't look as much like that with Tatiana because she is just kind of experimenting, letting things fall where they may.
Mm-hmm.
And then she does a very good job of making the end of all of this very clean.
Yeah. You can think of this on the smaller scale and also the larger scale with your dancing. And it's the idea that you have to like, I used to say like you have to go through the forest of silly before you can get to the field of awesome. Right. And then I saw a TikTok yesterday that used the words the mountain of cringe to the valley of cool. And I'm like, that is more current. I like that a lot. But it's kind of like you have to move through a bent leg to get to a straight leg. Instead of thinking of like you've fallen into a pit of despair with sharp spikes at the bottom when you're in a cringy moment. Instead, think of it, it's something that you're moving through.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're continuing to move and to dance, it's inevitable for you to get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's when you have that sudden anxiety and almost like freeze state. That's what keeps you in the cringe.
Yeah.
So it's actually resisting the cringe that keeps you there.
Yeah. And to that point, you can also sometimes, by actually kind of just pausing where you're at, because you can see Tot kind of, as she's swinging out, she kind of has a moment where she does like a little bit of a double step because she's not sure exactly where she needs to be. So she plants the one foot. She plants her right foot. And then she kind of adjusts it. And that's because she's wanting to adjust a little bit, but she's not trying to force anything. She's kind of almost waiting to see what Ben is going to do and just getting herself in a little bit better situation.
She's seeking stability and with that stability, the ability to choose then what happens next.
Yeah. So moments kind of like that where you almost pause a little bit or, you know, do something that allows you to give your partner a second to decide if they're doing something or if they're letting you do something. Like that is another way to, you know, not abort because she very easily could have aborted this because it's not the smoothest exit.
It's like a moment to pause and be like, okay, this is where I am. What does that mean? And what is the choice I can make from here?
Yeah.
Instead of having that intermediary, like, oh no, I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
You skip right ahead to radical acceptance. Like, okay, this is my life now. So what does that mean? And move through it.
Yep. Exactly. And like I said, she just does a really good job of ending it well and then going back into just something super basic.
Mm-hmm. What was another thing I was thinking of earlier today, just with musicality in general? Musicality isn't just knowing when to start something, it's knowing when to stop something.
Yeah.
And like I can't we'll just leave the screen here for a second. Because it's entertaining. Because like watching All Star and Below and seeing people have the possibility of like really great moments, but they either start too soon or too late, and or they end too soon or too late.
Yeah.
And it's finding that sweet spot of like, yeah, this is when this moment should begin and this is when this moment should end. And usually the music will tell you. There is some sort of phrasing indication in the music where they're like, yeah, this musical moment, the music, it's over. So it should be over in the dancing. What was really cool about this video, I love that Ben's doing this now, is he's compiling a spotlight with like prelims and all skates. So this is one of their prelims dances. I love like they go from something silly and transition it into something dancey.
Yeah.
And partnered. They're not staying in perpetual, what is this territory? Like that'll happen to all of us at some point in time.
Yeah.
It's just a vibe. It's this minor curse that just compels us on occasion. I'm just highlighting that, like, I appreciate this choice and how they transitioned.
Yeah.
And then it's just like a simple hip catch inside of a sugar tuck. Like, that's all it is. Like, it's a super simple starter step. And I feel like that's something else that happens is people are like, well, we just did something really bonkers for our beginning. So now the starter step also has to be bonkers. That is not true.
Yeah.
I would prefer, like, the point is to get connected. That's the point of a starter step. And like even the champs do that.
Yep. Pretty much. Yeah, okay, so right there.
I read your mind. I was already backing up.
So this is such a good example. Like, she's clearly going to do something, and I don't know what she was expecting then, but she kind of takes it. It looks like she has a little bit too much energy. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but she really takes it and calms it right down and moves into something that's very controlled.
Yeah, it looks like she's taking energy that he intended to go in a particular direction, and she's changing which direction it goes.
Yeah.
So it's not like he didn't do anything wrong. She
No.
just decided, like, he was leading pattern A, and she was like, ooh, but this pattern B could come out of this real too, and I like it better.
Yeah.
Which is a follows prerogative.
Yeah.
And
again, this is what Tatiana is just so good at, is just like that experimenting and then getting back into the dance so easily.
Yeah. And if you watch Ben through this, he's not necessarily having to do anything drastically different from the pattern A that he was intending. He is, because of the way she's choosing to connect through this, she's communicating to him without throwing him off of his game. So he's able to remain connected and to stay really attentive. So that way they can both exit the moment connected and together.
Yeah, and I like that pretty much anytime she really plays around with something, she goes right back to like a basic of some sort, right? So we have this whole rotational moment, and then she does a little foot thing, and then she goes back to just like following like normal.
I have another note about precision. So I think, because we're also talking about perfection tonight, I just want to be really clear. When we say precision, we mean intention.
Yeah.
And the more precise you are, the more control you have over your entire body, head to toe, where it is in space and when. That's precision.
Yeah.
Perfection is when that precision aligns with kind of standard shared ideas of what a dance should look like. So, for example, reason why I thought of this is because we also have Chantel in this video, who is a ballerina, and seeing her in her element of ballet, she has incredible precision in that context. And because she's such a highly trained dancer, she brings that level of precision into her West Coast swing. And you can tell the majority of the time she's trying to be very precise with where her body is. All dancers have that drive to be precise in West Coast swing, because like it's your ability to have control. I think the thing that we're talking about is whether or not you're also okay with just trusting your technique and letting the physics of that drive the majority of your dance in certain contexts. And what that means is like, hey, my technique is good enough. I don't have to be 100% focused on 100% of my body 100% of the time.
Yeah.
That's trusting your technique, because you're like, yeah, my foot's got me. Like with Tot, she has practiced falling down and getting up. She's practiced falling down and catching herself and getting back up.
Yeah.
And so she trusts how her body is going to respond to certain physics situations, as we shall call them, just to the effects of gravity.
Yeah.
She trusts herself. And so that's how she's able to really 99.9% of the time seamlessly do these feats of gymnastics in a West Coast swing context. But if we were to like take a snapshot of maybe a position that she's in, like we were talking about with her on the floor and then changing positions and getting back up in that spotlight, we take a photo and like compare it to the perfection of West Coast swing, it's not a direct comparison. It doesn't have that perfection to it, but it has some semblance of precision because of simply the phenomenal amount of hours that she has practiced purposefully for this dance. And as a benefit of all of that purposeful practice, she can now also trust her technique and be like, okay, I don't have to be as precise. I can choose when I want to be precise. And in these dances, we're seeing Tot choose musical moments to be precise and to really draw our attention. So that's what we're remembering.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that note, because both Cameo and Chantel are in the background of this, I want to mention like, sorry, I saw that Aaron sent a question. So like the thing about watching these really high level champion dancers, like there's the difference, because if you watch like Cameo and Chantel, they look like they're trying to be perfect, but also because especially Cameo, because she's been doing this for such a long time, like the perfection that it feels like you're watching isn't actually perfection. It's really going with the flow, but then knowing how to create certain things in your body based on what you're feeling to make certain looks, right? So if you're really familiar with how certain things feel in your body and whatnot, like that's how you're able to get that look that, you know, it looks more like perfect, you know, to that note. But it's not that. And I think Tatiana is just such a good example because she isn't a ballerina like Cameo and Chantel, right? So when she's doing things that are a little bit more letting things fall where they may, it doesn't look quite as like perfect as it might with like Chantel or Cameo. But that's just because they have a different level of control over their bodies. Ballet is a whole different field in the amounts of things that you can control. So, you know, when you're trained on that level, things are going to look super perfect most of the time, even when it's similar to like what Tatiana's doing, where, you know, she's letting things fall where they may more, but there's still that intention to it, as to she is intentionally letting things fall where they may and then cleaning up the ends of things.
Yeah. And like that's the difference between taught social or Jack and Jill dancing and taught in a routine. Because the reason why Jordan and Tot were so phenomenally successful for almost 2 decades straight was because they had that perfect precision in their classic routines. But both of them have also developed incredible skill in trusting their technique in a social context.
Yeah.
And that's why they're both such profoundly balanced dancers as individuals. I remember hearing stories of how Jessica McCurdy really struggled to transition from routines to Jack and Jill dancing, for example, because it's an entirely different beast to trust your technique and to improvise on the fly with the partner on the floor. This moment was hilarious. It takes a lot to like fully break Tatiana.
I know.
and then pulled it
not
off.
expecting that.
So good. I'm gonna go back to the beginning of this dance.
Aaron asked, how do you know internally you're able to hit that precision?
This is where the joke of dancers or narcissists comes in. It's a lot of practicing in a mirror and being able to associate a look with a feeling. So then when you don't have the mirror, if you have the feeling, you're like, this is how I look.
Yeah. Does that answer the questionnaire?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is why like learning at West Coast swing events and hotels for the longest time drove me bonkers, because I was a solo dancer first, and you go to studios with wall-to-wall mirrors.
Yeah.
So you could like really be precise with your movement, because it feels like being a two-legged stool at a dance event learning without a mirror to me, because it's like I need that extra feedback, because you can't, if you don't know what you look like, you can't confirm that just because it feels good doesn't mean it looks good.
Yeah.
And oh man, if we just had mirrors, like we ship floors all over the country. Why can't we ship a bank of mirrors? Anyways, sorry. Rant. So Tara Trasser is also in these videos, and it reminded me at City of Angels this year. She and Meech taught a really simple intermediate kind of like one phrase routine for one of their workshops. And because Phoenix and I were teaching the switch class afterwards, we were there a little early, and so we got to see them run it for the class for the video recap. And watching Tara do this simple choreography over and over again, so precise, it was so satisfying. Oh man. And even at the end, like they'd run it I think 4 times in a row. It was like almost the whole song that they were demoing this on video for people. He decided to change the game at the tail end of the very last run through. And not only did she react perfectly, but she managed to not get thrown off and still completed the choreography perfectly. And I was like, yes.
Yeah, so I think like the overall arcing theme of this whole episode is just really like getting to know your body and like what certain things feel like, and then what that correlates to it looking like is super important in terms of how you translate that to like a competition of sorts, like or to the floor, like just in general, like the social floor. I mean, there's just such a mental aspect to it that it's really interesting to see just the differences between the high level dancers and how they choose to interpret things and choose to let their dancing happen, I guess. Right, because Tatiana is somebody that like she could absolutely make her dancing look all the time as precise as like Cameo and Chantel, but that's not her goal, at least from the way that she dances. That doesn't seem to be her goal. Her goal seems to be kind of playing around with things and seeing what can happen if I do this. And she's okay with things not working out perfectly.
But then meanwhile, she and Jordan like will teach a whole day of workshops or whatever, and they'll do mini just technique demos throughout the day. And like you watch those technique demos, and those have the level of perfect precision that the routines have. So yeah. One of my favorite things is making my dance partner laugh so hard that they kind of lose control of their core.
Yeah. So all that to say, if you want your dancing to look like Tatiana, that's wonderful. If you want your dancing to look similar to like Chantel and Cameo, where it looks super perfect, that's great. Just make sure you're not in the mindset of this has to be perfect. Because I don't think that any of them are in that mindset.
Right. Ugh, that was a satisfying episode. All right. Any questions?
Early.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too.
It gives me more time to be a puddle on the floor tomorrow. Because wow, this week has been a lot.
Yeah.
Let us know in the comments if Mercury in the Microwave has also sent your entire world into a tailspin over this past week. And yes, I said Mercury in the Microwave because it's funnier that way. And I only like jokingly believe in astrology. So
yeah.
like every once in a while I'm like, nah.
Just consider it for a second.
Yeah. It's kind of like the thing whenever because the whole full moon concept. But then you talk to someone who's worked in healthcare and been like in an ER on the full moon, such as yourself. And you're like,
it's a thing.
That's a thing.
It's a thing.
It's just,
it's
constantly
also
questioning reality.
Yep. In healthcare, it's also a thing when somebody says it's kind of quiet. It becomes very much not that very
You just manifest physical trauma when you say that.
Pretty much. Anyways.
Thank you all for joining us.
Like this episode. It was kind of a more chatty episode about, mindset and whatnot. Yeah. I feel like it was probably, at least for me, geared a little bit more towards follows because I think follows have that tendency towards, wanting things to be absolutely perfect more than leads do. Because I think as follows, we're the ones that are like doing the embellishing, right? To make things pretty. So I think that has, a tendency to be something more follows get into their brains than leads. I mean, at the same time, like leads do it too.
Oh, yeah. It happens with leads. I would say with follows, it tends to have a holistic vibe to it. Like every element of your dancing, we have that vibe with. But for leaders, there tends to be like one thing that they're focusing on at any given time, and then they have that vibe with it. Yeah. So like, for example, leaders coming into intermediate are really worried about phrasing, for example. And basically whatever, like, we're not saying don't have a hyper focus. If you enjoy having a hyper focus and that helps to improve your dancing, do that. Just remember that level of focus is probably going to detract from the connection and the partnership.
Yeah. Well, and also just because you have hyper focus on something doesn't mean that it needs or has to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
Bingo.
Just because you're focused on something, you can improve it. It doesn't mean that it has to, you shouldn't be hyper focused on perfecting something. You should, if you're going to be hyper focused on something, hyper focus on, let's see how I can improve with this.
Yeah. So, that was satisfying. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back at some point in the future.
Technically,
let us know if you have any comments, questions, stories about astrology, We can't wait to hear about them.
Yep. We'll talk to you all next time.
Bye. Why does my power keep unplugging? All right. Be warned now that if I suddenly disappear, it's because I didn't notice that my power was unplugged and my computer died.
I really wonder what Marcus and Rosemary are talking about in the background there.
Oh, no kidding. Like what?
They're like
What?
whispering.
They're colluding.
I'd also like to point out, it looks like Kyle's in the background, like really focused on his hand.
Yes. It's so funny because in this, at some point earlier, I think Sarah was just like having the time of her life. Yeah, it's right around here. It's right at the part of the song where it was suddenly not explicit. I think we were all used to the explicit version. Sarah was just ready to go. Yeah. So cute.